Welcome to The Big L, your unofficial source for Libertarian Party news, arcana, and information for the liberty-minded political junkie. Find us at BL017.com. Here's your host, Libertarian Party insider and the pink flame of liberty, Karen Ann Harlos.
Well, hello, everyone. You are listening to the Big L podcast, and today we are going to be talking about the Libertarian Party of Stockholm.
So tell me if you like her, don't try to say you don't. I can see it in your eyes that you want to try and go, but that ain't the right choice, yeah, you already know. I'm gonna make you stay with me and be mad if you don't. Girlfriend, I will be your girlfriend. I will be your girlfriend. I will be your girlfriend.
So I am back with the final plank in my series on the common fundamentals of the early Libertarian Party, which have been preserved and carried forward by the current Libertarian Party Radical Caucus. And this is the one principle that I expect will be the most controversial, and it is called no particular order. And the systemization of it would be no particular orderism, or for short, NPO. But first, a bit of a personal update, as I am wont to do. My regular listeners and my social media followers, follow me on Insta and Facebook. You guys know that this has been a pretty rough year for me, with family loss and health issues. And the health issues, which I had expected to be pretty stabilized by now, are not quite there yet. But my doctors are getting closer to that reality. But yes, it still does affect a good deal of my life right now. But to cap off the shit stew that this year has been, I have been informed that my regular day job, I've been there for almost 10 years, is being phased out. There is no set time, as they are working with me to keep me on until I find another job and or at least get through the major medical visits I have coming up. They don't want to leave me in the lurch, but this is a bummer nonetheless. And it's a remote gig, which is pretty sweet. So if you know anyone who is in the market for a fantastic remote paralegal, hit me up. Or this could be the opening I needed to hop on doing the media thing closer to full time. And I would do that in a heartbeat if I thought the support would be there. And I know I cannot judge any level of support by what I have so far, which is negligible and understandable because I haven't been consistent. There are large stretches of time in between my productions, and you can't do that if you are looking to make that your primary or at least equal gig. But I haven't been that consistent because my primary focus has to be my day job, but I can't leave my day job until I can be consistent with this, so it's a vicious catch-22. If you would like to see me take that leap of faith and venture into this area, and I'll share with you in a second some of the projects I have on the burner, perhaps you can commit to a few months of support to show me that the support and possibilities are there so I can, get a backbone to take the plunge. Also, the possibility of a permanent part-time job with my current employer was raised, so perhaps that is an option as an intermediary step. But I'm at the point in my life where I am the primary income earner in my home, so I do not have the luxury of just quitting and seeing where things go. Damn that libertarian sense of personal responsibility. So, besides this podcast, which I want to do and am working towards doing weekly and expand into more commentary rather than this lecture type format, which I'll still do some of that because teaching is my passion. I have several YouTube channels, with the main one being the Pink Flame of Liberty, and another one that branches off for my personal lifestyle type content. I am also starting a series with my good friend Michael Seebeck on the basics of parliamentary procedure. It will be from two of the laity, not the priesthood experts, and we will be learning with you as I'm hoping to take the next step in certification. I just took the basic beginners one to be a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians. This YouTube, maybe it will be a podcast someday, but this YouTube show was originally going to be called Call the Question, Bitches. But if we want any chance of monetization from PooTube, we must not molest the sensitive ears of the censors. And in order to potentially entice you, I will have an advance bonus episode that I'm recording this evening that will be on Patreon, discussing the current brouhaha in the LP over the issue of a certain membership application that we had received from someone who is currently incarcerated, and whether that application could be or should be denied, as well as the chair's actions taken so far. As the chicken turns. And lastly, I am rerunning for National Secretary of the Libertarian Party. That is an unpaid gig, but it's one I actually love. If you support my run, I desperately need campaign volunteers, including a campaign manager, and I'll be pretty much kicking off the campaign in January. So now that I have lulled you into warm, comfortable distraction, the topic of the day, which seems to put an electric burr under the saddles of some of my libertarian peeps, again, is no particular orderism. Dun, dun, dun. Learning this principle knocked me out of moderate libertarianism for good, and it cleared up a hella lot of confusion. So as we've done with the other principles in this series, this is how the Radical Caucus words it. And I quote, "No particular order. The removal of one harmful government policy should never be held hostage for the removal of another, as this throws self-imposed barriers in the path of liberty and removes potential pressures for change. For example, saying that borders may be opened only after welfare is eliminated is unacceptable. The proper position is to push for both changes. Should we succeed in achieving open borders only to find that welfare burdens are increased, this should be used as an additional argument to abolish welfare." And their little summary statement is, the Libertarian Party should always steadfastly oppose harmful government policies, regardless of any promise that supporting one bad policy will ensure that another is abolished. Would also like to read for you a plank that I had gotten passed in the Libertarian Party of Colorado platform under the title of Implementation. And I quote, "We support any measure that actually reduces and does not increase illegitimate governmental action or violations of the rights of the individual as put forth in our preamble and the statement of principles. While recognizing that change often takes the form of increments and transitions, the policies in the planks that follow are to be taken as quickly as possible." And what this does is keeps us from the temptation of horse trading rights and actually upholding the rights of the individual, not some unlibertarian and imaginary collective. I'm going to beg your indulgence, as I sometimes do, in reading a piece, an article, almost in full. And this is the best introductory short article I've ever read on this topic. It really had a big influence in my early libertarian development. And it's the one that was given to me by a friend when I had asked about no particular orderism. The article is by my friend Thomas Knapp, and it is called Against Stockholm-Libertarianism. And from I'll let you know when I'm done quoting Mr. Knapp. Though you know I intersperse some of myself. I think you can tell the difference between when I'm quoting and when I'm not, but he also doesn't believe in IP, so he's not going to be telling me, you're stealing my content. I've given him proper credit. And we go. We should repeal all of America's 20,000 odd gun control laws. But of course, we can't do that until we've eliminated homicide. We should close down the war on drugs, but of course we can't do that until we've scourged away every last vestige of the human desire for intoxication. We should eliminate Social Security, but of course we can't do that until all its current and future payees lie a-moldering in the grave, having never missed a monthly check. If I put any of these propositions up for debate, my fellow libertarians would make short work of me. They'd have my head on a platter. It would be easy, because all three of the propositions are ridiculous on their faces. But consider these quotes. Under the present welfare system, a vote for open borders is a vote for higher taxes for all. Someday, the libertarian message of peace, liberty, and prosperity will reach the entire world. All people will then enjoy the freedom and high standard of living we take for granted. In that day, immigration and open borders will be non-issues. Sound familiar? That's George Phillies, candidate for the Libertarian Party's 2008 presidential nomination. Here's another quote. We must secure our borders before we can deal with the issue of how to deal with illegal immigrants already in our country. Heard something like that before? That's Wayne Allen Root, ooh hiss, candidate for the Libertarian Party's 2008 presidential nomination. Another quote. Physically secure our borders and coastlines. We must do whatever it takes to control entry into our country before we undertake complicated immigration reform proposals. Taxpayers should not pay for illegal immigrants who must use hospitals, clinics, schools, roads, and social services. Ring a bell? Hey, that's Ron Paul, another former Libertarian presidential nomination candidate. I'm including him because despite his somewhat recent born-again hard claims to represent conservatism, most libertarians regard him as one of our own. And this is me, Karen Ann speaking. I certainly do. Continuing now with Mr. Knapp. It's not just presidential candidates, of course. Here's another quote. The problem with so many libertarian formulations is that they do not respect reality. Rather, they hold up the libertarian ideal, lament its unattainability, and refuse to debate the issue until the ideal is achieved. That's intellectually lazy. It's also an affront to reality, the rational man's anchor. And the reality is that the American welfare state is accreting, not shrinking. The reality is that the more libertarians support the importation of impoverished minorities with a tradition of aggressively manipulating the political apparatus to obtain property not theirs, the more intractable the welfare state will become. That is Ilana Mercer. Title of the article of Mercer is The Work Open Border Libertarians Won't Do at Free Market News Network. And I threw up in my mouth a little reading that. This is me again, at some of the high-handed xenophobia that was in there. Gross. All right, another quote. This is what is evident in the current debate about illegal immigration. The welfare state is the underlying fundamental problem. Until that system is abolished, until a revolutionary change occurs and no Peter is looted for the sake of any Paul, whether poor, rich, legal, or illegal, there will be no solution to the illegal immigration problem. And that is Tibor R. Mackin, Welfare State and Illegal Immigration. Another quote. In a world with radically different levels of economic freedom and thus of economic prosperity, relatively free and prosperous nations cannot allow completely unrestricted immigration without risking serious socioeconomic disruption. And that is Brian Holtz, and he wrote on Iraq exit, Social Security, and immigration. So now continuing with Mr. Knapp. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a hostage situation. It's a neat scam. This holding of one positive reform hostage, while around the corner, your political enemies hold its counterpart hostage as well. You won't let your hostage go until they let their hostage go, and they won't let their hostage go until you let yours go. And they'd really rather you didn't. No muss, no fuss. You've both successfully avoided responsibility. They've avoided doing something they don't want to do anyway, and you've avoided doing something you claim you want to do but are looking for an excuse not to do it. It's the pleading prayer of St. Augustine, and I'm going to butcher this. Da mihi castitatem et continuatium sed noli modo. Close enough. Cleverly disguised as practical political necessity. There are probably as many extant definitions of libertarianism as there are libertarians, and even zero aggression principle libertarians often disagree on what course that principle dictates in various circumstances. Among the strangest of these definitions is, I stand for freedom just as soon as those other guys do, and not a moment before nonsense. As popular as know-nothing bullshit, festooned with, I'd love to advocate immigration freedom, but first you have to convince that guy over there to give up his food stamps, hostage-taking camouflage seems to have become in what passes for a libertarian movement these days. I'm surprised we're not all running into each other at Stockholm Syndrome survivor conventions. And that's the end of the article, and I give a little clap. I love his wordsmithing. I'm a fan. But I do think that described it very well. Now, I have become convinced that adhering to no particular orderism is the only path to libertarian success. We must take every opportunity for freedom wherever and whenever it presents itself, even if it is not our quote-unquote preferred order. So let's take the immigration question a bit more. Why do I support free and open immigration? Because freedom of movement is a basic natural right. And as an aside, no, that does not mean you can be forced to have people on your private property that you do not want. This does require willing hosts, except for basic ingress and egress. Continuing down that rabbit trail, I do not believe the donut problem or the encirclement problem is a real libertarian problem, any more than witches who steal baskets of penises are a libertarian problem. And sometimes the solution to this is called the Blockian proviso, but I also think calling it the Blockian proviso is just as good as kind of a sarcastic aside to those who think that would be allowable. And as much as I admire Stefan Kinsella, who originally coined that and who does not agree with me on the issue, that this type of libertarian navel gazing, along the likes of whether or not, quote unquote, voluntary slavery is libertarian, those sorts of things aren't getting us anywhere, and they can be a cold son of a bitch. So from that assumption, is blocking this right justified because this person may claim welfare? Or let's say they definitely will claim welfare. Is it justified then to restrict their freedom of movement? No. The welfare is not justified, but that's a separate issue. And that is one of the state's own making. The state breaks our legs and then steals from everyone to provide crutches for everyone. If you buy the argument that immigration can be restricted on these grounds, well, then no one should be able to have children until they can guarantee these children will never suck from the state's teat, which I hate to break it to you, we all do. It is inevitable in the present state of things because the state has set us up to be dependents. You cannot weigh rights on some cosmic scale of the net reduction of aggression, as some, such as Brian Holtz, claim. That is basically horse trading other people's rights. As the person of the year, Greta, would say, how dare you? How dare you?
How dare you?
You cannot restrict rights based upon pre-crime or based upon the fact that some other people might cause the state to aggress against you. That's using people's rights as a human shield against a third-party aggressor. You don't do that with people who were already born in this country. What is the difference in the human rights? I maintain there is none. Once, when debating this issue, I was presented with what my interlocutor thought was a gotcha, but it really just betrayed his talent for the ludicrous. He asked me if it came up, would I eliminate funding for the meals of prisoners before releasing them from the prison? First of all, that's treating one whole circumstance as unrelated parts. The act of imprisonment bundles with it the obligation to provide food. They cannot be separated. But the second helping in that casserole of nonsense is that while in the abstract, every little thing is theoretically possible to come up for abolition, the nature of reality in society is that really at any given time, there is only a certain range that is actually possible. There is a limit to what can be on the table in a sane universe at a particular time. But there is enough variety out of what is possible to make this principle indispensable. Let me give another example. After the legalization of same-sex marriage, there were some states that began to look at abolishing marriage licensure altogether. Not because they all of a sudden turned into libertarians, but because they wanted to find a way to avoid having to treat all couples equally, regardless of what sex they were, i.e., some of the motivation was bigoted. So does that mean that libertarians should have opposed such legislation? Meaning the legislation to abolish marriage licensure altogether? Of course not. The Libertarian Party has kind of bent over and lifted its skirts on this issue, but we'll get into that at another time. I'm going to use a biblical principle, as I tend to do. What man means for evil, God means for good. What statists mean for evil, libertarians can mean for good. Not equating us with God. Don't have a frickin' hissy fit. One can support a result without supporting the motivation or even supporting the whole result, as long as it is an actual step to liberty. Another example of this, such a delicious is the wrong word, it would be the Vegemite of ideas, is the quote unquote fair tax. And that term just gives me the frickin' hives and the crabs at the same time. There is no such thing as a fair tax for one thing, but what it does, what is horse trade rights? Right now, there are people avoiding income tax altogether, and that's supposed to be a feature of the fair tax, that it will get them too. Really? So we want more people to be equally stolen from to somehow make us feel better. Listen, anyone who's getting away with not paying income tax right now, good for them. Wish I could do it. And also, not only does it then entrap these people who were successfully avoiding it, it also inserts the government into an area that they were never in before. And that is mandatory little slice off the top of all transactions. I know there's some exceptions, secondhand goods, all of that, but it's now putting them directly into the transaction between two people. Now, I know some of the states have done this already with their sales tax, which is freaking ridiculous. But now this would be the federal government too. Hey, we might as well all get into this party. And to me, that is the epitome of why no particular order is essential. No. Get rid of the income tax. Substitute it with nothing. Abolish and replace with nothing. That is the heartbeat of no particular orderism when it comes to harmful government policies. Or you'll often hear, there are, the concern trolling. There are more important things to worry about. Eat your sandwich. There are starving children in India. There are more important issues to worry about. To who? You don't get to determine what is important to the individual. I guarantee you that person who is really desiring to cross the border, it's not more important to them, or whatever the issue is that we happen to talk about. And that argument is only relevant if both things, the allegedly major thing that's more important and the minor thing, are also both equally on the table for abolishment. If that's the case, then by all means, pick one that you think will do the greatest good. If not, one is sacrificing steps that actually can be taken, successes that can be actually won now because they prefer other steps, without considering that these other small steps might result in the death of 1,000 cuts to the state. And therefore, no particular orderism is ruthlessly pragmatic. It is not pragmatic to deny it. Here is a resolution passed by the Libertarian National Committee in the early party if you doubt that this was not the position of the early party. Here is the resolution. We must not commit ourselves to any particular order of destatization. That's a wonderful phrase. For it would be construed as our endorsing the continuation of statism and the violation of rights. Since we must never be in the position of advocating the continuation of tyranny, we should always accept any and all destatizing measures wherever and whenever we can. Libertarians know that you cannot centrally plan government, that there are unintended consequences that are usually worse than the thing that was done with all good intentions, just like this whole membership issue that's going on in the Libertarian Party right now. And you can't centrally plan society, but all of a sudden they have cognitive dissonance. They turn around and think that they can centrally plan the March of Liberty. They cannot. You do not kill a hydra by letting it grow another head. Alrighty, I hope that gave you some food for thought. I'm sure there'll be commentary where we can interact back and forth. But that is it for this episode. You have an awesome day. Mi guapas de libertad.
Thank you for listening to The Big L, where size does matter. Subscribe today and help support the show by going to BL017.com. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.
I must take this time to disseminate the appropriate disclaimers and advisories. If it pleases the Crown, while I am an officer of the National Libertarian Party and have in fact sold my soul to the blessed chicken on a stick, all opinions, perspectives, rants, jokes, and outbursts of any and all kinds are solely me speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of the party. I am not the party spokesperson, just a fanatic who happens to hold a position. Before anything else, I am a liberty activist, just like you. And if you call me a politician, I die a little inside. Thank you.